from FingerLakes1.com. You're listening to Inside the FLX. I'm Josh Durso, and our program today starts in Geneva, New York. In May of 2012, Jim Meaney moved to the city. 3 years later, he ran for city council, receiving the endorsement of the Finger Lakes Times. Then, on July 8th, 2016, my birthday, a post titled Geneva Believer is open for business appeared online. Now, more than a year and a half later, the Geneva Believer blog has grown and evolved, all the while maintaining the independence and honesty it set out to achieve in local news coverage on day one. Thank you, Jim, for being here.
Thanks for having me, Josh. Thanks for that kind intro.
So, I guess the big question that probably a lot of folks are asking right now is, what is the Geneva Believer for those who might not live in the city?
Geneva Believer is a blog I started to examine things going on in the city that weren't necessarily being examined in the local media. City bureaucracy, conflicts of interest, things that are going on that affect a lot of people that aren't always being looked at. And a lot of people ask me why I don't publish more positive articles. And my response is always, you can hear a lot of positive news about Geneva. There's positive things going on. I don't deny that there's a lot of positive things going on, but there are things that need to be examined more closely, and that's what the purpose of the blog is, and also to bring the community in to help with writing the blog. And that's another thing I always tell people. I'm the editor, but the blog is not solely the brainchild of me, and I don't come up with all the ideas. I hear a lot from the community. I get a lot of feedback, a lot of tips, and I guess that's it. The purpose is to bring attention to those things that we're not looking closely at.
So what was then I guess what I'd like you to elaborate a little bit on is, what was the why? Was there a certain event or a certain series of events that made you say, okay, I've thought about this and I've just got to do it. This has to happen.
Yeah, I would say some of the first few articles I wrote were about the Geneva BID, the Business Improvement District, and that was one of the first things I learned about when I moved to Geneva. That the BID was there, and I always had questions about what they did and what exactly their role was. They seemed to talk a lot about they provide services and they want to have 100% occupancy in downtown. But I was always wondering exactly, what do they do? Where does their money come from? My sister, who's since passed away, she owned a business in downtown Geneva, and she was the first person to tell me about the BID and the bad experience she had going to them to ask for help with her small business. And it was always in the back of my mind. I started looking around online and finding out about other BIDs, how the BID works, and I realized I can't believe this is still going on. You have an organization that is made up of property owners, and those property owners who own more property have they have a weighted voting system within their board. Right. So the more property you own, the more your vote counts. It all seemed very, very unfair. I heard from small business owners in downtown and even property owners in downtown who didn't like the way the BID was doing business, but no one really wanted to talk about it because they all had something to lose. Mm-hmm. So that was, and once I started doing research on it, I started showing it to my wife, and she'd hear me talk about it all the time. She was like, "You have to tell people about this. You have to write a blog or do something." So that was the impetus of it. Really was the BID, and here I am a couple years later, and the BID is still doing exactly what they've always done. So I don't know about the effectiveness of that, but they were the ones who I would say that was the one issue that got me moving in the direction.
And it seems to be that, as you go through the website, as you look at the different stories and read them, it seems to be very discussion-based, very this is about having a conversation. Here's information. You're not trying to make anyone believe a certain thing or a certain set of beliefs that you feel, rather just trying to present as much information as you can. I'll admit, some of the stories that you've published over the last year and a half, especially in the last year, they've contained some serious document dumps from what I would assume would be FOIL requests and a lot of groundwork, a lot of effort out of you personally. Mm-hmm. has that taken a toll on you? The physical, obviously, your publishing schedule is such that you have time and you're able to sort of do this, I guess, at your leisure, if you want to call it that. But at the same time, it's still work.
Yeah, it's been an adjustment. It affects my family. As far as the amount of time that I put into it, especially once I hone in on something and I say, okay, I see something here. Somebody's not telling us something, and then I'm honing in on it. There are a lot of nights where I'm up late, where I should be going to sleep, when I have to work in the morning. So it's and then there are some of the stories that feel, there's some. I think that everything I've written about is important. Some feel a little bit more important. Some feel a lot more important, especially when I'm hearing from people about how this issue is affecting them. So, there are nights I don't sleep well, or nights that I wake up at 4 a.m. and first thing in my head is the Foundry. But yeah, and as far as a personal toll, I get there's been some awkward conversations at Wegmans, or people that I used to feel a little. I feel a little bit of a standoffishness from some people, but overall the positive feedback has outweighed any of the negative, and that's what keeps me going.
And we were talking about this before we actually went on here. The missing piece in journalism is that hyper-local sort of focus on a specific community. And you yourself said that there are stories that, folks have said, hey, why aren't you talking about this? But you want to focus on a very important subject, the city of Geneva, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's where I live. And I spend time thinking about regional and national politics, but there's so much going. If you take the time to focus on your own city and really everything, all the mechanisms that are going on within the city, the business community, and all of that takes a lot of time and a lot of thought and a lot of energy. And yeah, that's something that I've always wanted from the beginning, to make sure that it stays hyper local. And I hear stories that are heartbreaking, things that injustices people are experiencing outside of the city of Geneva, and no one else will listen to them. And those comments come in on the Facebook page too, where people say, can you help me with this? And I have to tell them, this isn't really what I do, and I try to point them in a direction of somewhere else they can go. But yeah, it's all about Geneva. So
this is as a publisher who is focusing solely on the digital side of content. What do you say to the folks who sit out there and they think, well, it's just a blog, or it's just a website? I mean, we see it here at Finger Lakes One because we are exclusively digital, and we don't do the physical paper that some folks in our culture, in our society here locally, specifically the older folks, treat the paper with a little more dignity than they do the digital type of news, despite the fact that both are completely legitimate. And right. You are a perfect example of that. You're doing immense legwork. You're doing immense investigative journalism. And still, I'm sure there are a lot of folks out there who say, well, it's just a blog. What do you say to those people who have that sort of standoffish approach to what you're doing?
Well, I think, as a rule, the people who would say that don't like something that I'm writing. That would probably be, in most cases, the reason that they're bringing that up.
It's a particular issue.
It's a particular issue. They may not want to admit it, but usually it's a particular issue. And I would also just tell them we live in a different culture now, and the way that people receive news and the way that news is created is very different. Citizen journalism is becoming more prevalent around the country, and it's having an effect. It's having an effect on policy. It's having an effect on the way people vote. It's having an effect on the way people look at what's going on in their communities.
So let's shift gears and focus right in on Geneva and some of the issues. What did we learn about Geneva in 2017? If you were going to sort of cherry pick one or two things that really stood out to you throughout the year, what would a couple of those items be?
I think we learned that city council, there are good people on city council who may not always understand everything that they're being asked to understand, or maybe they're not, I don't know how to put it, maybe they're not looking at all different sides to things. I think they relied a lot on the city manager to tell them all of the facts, and the city manager isn't always giving them all the information they need. The other thing, the biggest thing that I learned is that there are a lot of people in Geneva who care, a lot of people who want to see change, a lot of people who don't like to see injustice, and they want their voices heard, and they don't like to see the conflicts of interest and the bureaucracy that makes it hard on a lot of people. And I think I also learned that it's hard for the city government they're not quite sure yet. I still don't think they're sure how to deal with a strong public response to a story, unless it's something that they can deal with quickly, like a few years ago, the fire horn controversy in downtown Geneva. Mm-hmm. Said, we're going to make a decision this day. Everybody shows up, everybody complains, they make their decision, and it's over. And things like the foundry, and then the Marsh Creek issue that happened, and the police issue, which seems to be continuing. I'm not sure. I don't think city council's quite gotten a grip on how to deal with getting that kind of feedback from the public, especially when people are so emotional, when people are being hurt by things that have happened in the city.
Now, your feelings on the exit of Matt Horn, obviously resigned in December, left in January. Your feelings on that exit and where it leaves the city now?
I was surprised as much as anyone was surprised. I've always been someone who's criticized, not always, but I've at least on the blog, I've criticized Matt Horn quite a bit. And I think that that's important. I know that he's done good things for the city, and I know that he has positive traits and has done good things for downtown. I'm less concerned about him leaving as I am about what's going to happen now. The city's in good hands, I believe, with the crew that they have taking over the city manager role. But now this is a hugely important decision for the city, because we saw how much influence the city manager had in the past year. Whenever something crazy happens, in many cities, the first person they call is the mayor. You see quotes from the mayor in the paper or from city council. And in the city of Geneva, it's the city manager. They even discourage city council to comment on certain issues. So I was, in a way, I was happy to see Matt Horn go, because I think that he was so very articulate and really a brilliant person, that he could take a situation and get people to believe that one thing was happening when it wasn't. Not that I don't want another intelligent person in there. Obviously, I want someone intelligent. Right. So there was a part of me that was glad to see him go, and to think, hey, we can start with a new slate, get a new city manager in there sometime in the next however many months or in the next year. City council, I think there's going to be a big turnover in the next election, so I see it as a positive thing. We're it's a change, but it's an opportunity for good things to happen as well.
What do you say to the folks who think that, they may agree with most of what you just said, but they say, well, a big reason why you have this situation, this dynamic between city council and the city manager, is because city council lacks in a lot of ways. The city manager ends up having to compensate for what city council is not doing. And, as a person who's living that on a daily basis, you're doing that job over and over again, running the city. at what point does it become sort of like survival mode where you're like, okay, I have to take the lead here. They aren't going to provide me with the things that I need, so this is just what I have to do. Do you think that is a real thing, or do you think that's just sort of hogwash in terms of, the city manager can defer and force them to be more accountable and to do more of the legwork themselves, the political part that they're supposed to do?
I don't know how much the city manager can really force them to do that, but that is a real thing. I agree, and I know that a lot of counselors, when you win a city council seat, you don't get paid much, and you're asked to give a lot of your time. You're asked to research a lot of stories, look into a lot of policies, and it's time consuming, and it takes a lot of energy. And some counselors are better than others. I think there are some on city council who really don't particularly spend that much time being a city councilor, and they just wait for the city manager to tell them what they should think, or give them two choices in which side to come down on. So I think it's both. I think the city manager is forced into that role by city councilors who aren't necessarily willing to put in the amount of effort and time to really gain an understanding of the issues. But at the same time, and that's.
Do those elected positions across the board, not just exclusively in Geneva, do they need to be better valued, I guess the word would be, so that you do have this scenario where people aren't treating it like a part-time job where they only have to think about it, or they can defer to another person? Does there need to be more value added to the position so that these people can be held accountable when they screw up?
Yeah, I'm not sure how to do that, but that's part of what I want to do with the blog. And some of the criticism I get from people is, why do you? Because I've picked on just about I'm pretty sure every single city councilor at some point or another I have written something.
I didn't see any that you excluded in the last year.
Okay. Because they need to be held accountable, and that can't. I think the people need to value, and the people need to understand how much influence city council has. I think a lot of people don't, and I think a lot of people, if it's a personality, if it's a person that they like, they figure, well, they've got it handled, they're doing a good job. And I think that people need to hold those positions accountable and really hold their feet to the fire. And if they're not doing their job, even if they're doing a pretty good job in their opinion, if they're not doing a very good job, then the next election cycle, we find somebody else. We bring somebody in there, we primary, we do whatever we have to do to get that changeover, to get people in there who do understand how much influence they have.
How does City Council right the ship moving forward? Of course, obviously you can't change what's happened in the last 2 to 3, 4 years, but looking forward, what do you see as some of the things that City Council can do just on the meeting-to-meeting basis to ease things, ease the tension that seems to exist in the city of Geneva?
Well, the first and most obvious and simple thing they could do is move all public comment back to the beginning of the meeting, and then have another one at the end of the meeting if people end up staying later to the end of the meeting. To me, that's the simplest thing that they could do, and it wouldn't be difficult. It doesn't disrupt anything to show the people that they're listening. And I think that that's something that they need to understand more into the next year, is that the people are watching, and the people are listening, and the people are paying attention, and they all need to gain a greater understanding of all the issues that they're dealing with, and remember that they are working for the people. As even though they're not getting paid much and they're being asked to do a lot, the people put their faith in them. They gave them the opportunity to serve the people, and that's something that they need to realize. And Geneva Believer doesn't serve city council; it serves the
Right.
people. That's the same. It's the same kind of idea. If the councilors aren't going to do it, I guess we'll have a blog that'll do it. That'll give people a voice and get those stories and get those things into the public eye and into the forefront.
So obviously, as the city moves forward with the search of the next city manager, trying to create a little more equilibrium with law enforcement and all of these other issues that are sort of simultaneously happening, all happening in lockstep. How does City Council, the city of Geneva, the folks who work there every day, how do they keep everything balanced and make sure that, certain folks aren't being forgotten, certain issues aren't being forgotten, certain things aren't being missed along the way, in your estimation? Because obviously your blog is a testament to all of the things that are happening in Geneva, literally right now. Like, I don't think, before we came on here, this morning I was sort of reading through the headlines in the last, say, 6 to 8 months of stories, and I don't think there's one that you've published that's truly been resolved. And it's
Right.
what has to give, or how is the city ever going to dig itself out of this hole so that, as you say, there are a lot of people who still believe? Well, what's that reason?
I don't know. They could read Geneva Believer a little more than they do. I know that they read it, though. I can't say they should read it more. I don't know I don't know if there's a magic button that can be pushed to get them to be aware. I think a lot of counselors still believe that most of the pushback that they're getting is just from a small number of people who want to make a lot of noise. But that's not the case, and I'm hoping that they learn that. I also think that the responsibility is on the public as well, that you need to have 15, 20 people showing up at every city council meeting. If something hasn't been resolved, then keep asking them to resolve it. Keep showing up. If you need to stand outside with signs, keep doing that. City council doesn't move in any direction, at least this council, and it probably goes back a lot further. They don't move on any difficult, controversial issues unless they really feel the pressure. They weren't going to do much of anything about the foundry until people started showing up, and until the TV media from Rochester showed up because the people let them know. So they can say that it's just a few activists. They can say it's just one bitter guy with a blog, but it's the people. So I think the people need to hold their feet to the fire.
So let's shift gears, and I want to get your take on the DRI as a whole, but then specifically the sign, the controversial sign. Obviously, Jackie Augustine, who co-hosts a podcast with me, The Debrief, had a lot to say about it, and I'm just very curious. Obviously, you've written about it, you've talked about it. What are your thoughts on the sign, and now where the DRI stands in general?
Well, as far as the sign goes, I'm glad. I was surprised that the city listened to the people and paid attention to the petitions and all the pushback they got on the sign. I never thought it was a good idea. I went to all of the DRI public input meetings. Whenever it was brought up, I didn't think that a lot of people were championing it anyway, and I thought it was a bad idea personally, obviously, and I wrote about it on the blog. I was heartened to see that the city listened to people and took it seriously. And now the situation is that the DRI money needs to be spent on streetscaping within the downtown district. So they're asking people for input on that, and I've got some ideas on that I'll be writing about soon. But I think it's also important for people to understand that the money can't be spent on anything else. All the projects, the Geneva Resiliency Center, they can't go back and put the money into that. They have to keep it within the streetscaping category. So I'm encouraged. I'm curious to see what they're going to do. They said they were going to have another date. They're going to announce a date when they'll start taking ideas from the public. Having gone through the whole DRI process, it felt like it didn't take very long, but it also felt like it took a long time. Overall, I was disappointed that in the city's application for the DRI, they cited the city's high level of poverty, and you know, in terms of poverty, the ways that it can be addressed with the DRI money would have been resiliency center and affordable housing in downtown, and neither of those were funded. And there's absolutely nothing in the DRI funding that gives any that will affect the poverty level or affect people of low income in the city at all. So I was disappointed in that. Overall, I think it's obviously a great thing. I love the road diet they're going to put on 5 and 20 and make that more accessible. And there's good things and other things that were disappointing.
Is that, as a resident of the city of Geneva, is that encouraging that the road diet on 5 and 20, is that possibly a game changer in the ways that it's been described? It's connecting the lakefront to downtown?
I believe so. We'll have to wait and see, but the way it is right now, crossing 5 and 20 from downtown, or even if you're coming from one of the other neighborhoods and you want to just walk, whether it's Lake Street or Castle Street, it's hairy. It's hairy. You get out there and you got your head on a swivel, yeah. And the light doesn't change. You push the button and you only have so much time. And I don't even know what it's like for people who may not be able to move as quickly as I can move. Mm-hmm. So it can only be a good thing in making downtown more accessible and making the lakefront more accessible to downtown and to the whole city. So I think it's a positive step.
Given the success that Geneva has seen over the last several years, are you surprised that poverty and affordable housing in particular haven't been addressed more vigorously?
No, I'm not surprised at all. That's kind of how things are in America. The people who don't have the resources, the people who don't have the money, their voices aren't heard. So, no, I'm not surprised about it. I'm encouraged that the comprehensive plan included an economic opportunity task force, which is supposed to be a new effort by the city, even a new city department that will be funded, and it'll be a place where they can bring in. Right now, there's outreach going on in the lower income community to find out what the barriers are people are facing when it comes to economic opportunity in the city, and the city plans to take those ideas, put them into a department, and then what I hope is that poverty is such a complex, difficult issue. There's so many different facets to it. But if we can bring in ideas that may have worked in other cities, new ideas, novel ideas, maybe this economic opportunity task force can do something besides just say, we have to find a better way to provide, the services we already have for people of low income. So
before we get you out of here, where can people find you? Where can they read the Geneva Believer? You can find Geneva Believer at genevabeliever.com. I've got a Facebook page, facebook.com/Geneva Believer. I've got just started an audio podcast in the past couple of weeks that you can also find at the Geneva Believer page, or on YouTube, or on any of your digital apps, podcast apps. Yep. So genevabeliever.com, that's the place to go, and that's the place to start. And let me know what you think. Give me feedback, give me ideas, and we'll do it together. Now, before I let you go, I do have to ask, because you mentioned the podcast. Yeah. The inspiration for that, or how long was that in the works before you finally were able to pull the trigger and say, this is something that I can fit into my schedule and make happen on a regular basis? I've been a listener of podcasts for 10 years. It was always kind of in the back of my mind, and I think that
in the last year, there's so many times that I feel like I don't have the time to write everything I want to write, and I don't have the time to when I talk to people in the community, a lot of these issues and a lot of these things we're talking about take a long time. You got to really get down in the weeds and talk about them. And I got the idea maybe a year ago, and I don't know exactly what it was. That there was nothing particularly that triggered me to start doing the audio podcast, except to say, hey, there's another way to get information to people. And I also want to bring more people from the community that many of us may not know the work that people are doing, and get those now that the blog has enough of a following, get people to know who the people are behind the issues and behind what's going on in the city.
Well, I really appreciate you coming in, and I'm sure we'll be having you back to talk more about all these issues. You're doing a really great job with the blog. I encourage everyone to get out there and read it, understand the things that are happening in your community. It's really, really, really important. Thanks for being on.
Thank you very much, Josh.
That is going to do it for today. I'd like to thank Jim Meaney, our listeners, and of course FingerLakes1.com for making this podcast possible. Inside the FLX airs Sundays at 7 p.m. on Spectrum, channel 1304. That's 1304, and is available on iTunes, Stitcher, and the FingerLakes1.com app. Thanks for listening, and we will catch you next time.